Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. My guest on the Wisdom of today is a friend and is a world-leading brain coach, the world's number one brain coach, Jim Kwik, a New York Times best-selling author and the man behind over 60 million podcast downloads across 195 countries. Jim, and I've heard his story many times from stage when we were at events together, but after a childhood brain injury left him labelled, Jim, this blows my mind. The boy with the broken brain, fancy giving a child that label, but he spent 3 decades developing the methodologies that now help everyone from Fortune 500 executives, Hollywood A-listers that people know the names of, and this is to unlock their cognitive potential. And so his mission, which I just love, is no brain left behind. And Jim, I'm so looking forward to this. You speaking so often, I'm really familiar with your work, and I can't wait for us to unpack this for people listening because, well, the brain's everything, right? If you're going to be successful in life. And so thank you for doing this podcast episode with us.
I've been looking forward to this, Simon. Thank you, everyone who's tuning in to this very cognitive conversation.
A very cognitive conversation. I just, I didn't want to get too deep into your story because
Yeah.
you tell it so compellingly. But imagine being labelled the boy with the broken brain as a child, and what does that do to you? So, you just want to catch everyone up who's not familiar with the story and set the scene, because that actually sets the foundation for just about everything we're going to talk about and everything you've learned over the years.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I went many years without sharing my story. Maybe because it's interesting. Some of the things that you're most ashamed of or embarrassed about becomes the things you become more proud of. But I
Mm,
realized that when I started sharing my story, of how I turned my mess and turned it into my mission, that I was able to connect deeper. I don't know if people just appreciated the vulnerability, or maybe it was just when they see me, when you and I have shared stages, which we've done many times.
mm,
If there's time, I'll do a demonstration where I'll memorize like an audience, like their
yeah.
names, or do something kind of spectacular. But maybe once I started sharing my story, it made it more relatable because otherwise people think that I was maybe born with this. And I really think that genius in all its forms, it's not necessarily born, but it's built. Yeah, as you alluded to, I had a a brain injury when I was a child. I was 5 years old in kindergarten class. There were all these fire engines outside. I remember like it was yesterday. But since we're so tiny humans, we couldn't see outside the window because the window was taller than we were. So we grabbed these chairs, and firefighters were like my heroes. It's like modern, they're like superheroes. They have their uniforms. They go towards
Yeah.
danger. They save the day. Um, well, we wanted to see what all the commotion was, but I lost my balance on the chair, and I ended up falling headfirst into the both the windowsill and then ricocheted into the radiator. And all I remember was being in the hospital right after that. And anyone who knows somebody who's had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, I had symptoms where I would have balance issues, coordination issues. And I'd constantly kind of like bump into things. I would have migraines every day as a child. What really showed up was in school. I had
Mm,
poor focus, I couldn't learn like the other kids. It took me 3 years longer to learn how to read, which is, embarrassing.
mm,
And these are the formative years, right, where you're developing your self-esteem, your identity. And I remember when I was 9 years old, I was slowing down a class, and my real name is Kwik. It's my father's name, it's my grandfather's name. I didn't change. It's not like a stage name. But everyone called me slow, and I was being teased pretty harshly because the teacher was repeating herself that morning over and over again just for me, you could tell.
mm,
And so I was being teased, and the teacher came to my defense with pure intentions. I definitely believe that. She pointed to me in front of the whole class and said, "Leave that kid alone. That's the boy with the broken brain." And adults have to be careful with their external words because they often become a child's internal words. So every single time I did badly in school or wasn't picked for sports, which was like every day, I would always say to myself, I remember this conversation in my head, like I would say, oh, because I have the broken brain. And
Mm.
that label became my limit. And it turns out okay at the end of the story, but I would struggle every single day in school. It was just not just elementary school, but it was middle school, junior high, high school. I remember failing, on the borderline of failing freshman English, and it was so embarrassing because they pulled my parents in from work and had that conversation with the teacher saying your son is not going to pass my class. And she gave me some hope. She said, I'm going to give him one last chance, a book report. And the book report was on Albert Einstein. And I remember promised the teacher, I promised my parents, because my parents immigrated here when I was when my dad was 13. He lost both his parents, came to the United States. We lived in the back of a laundromat that my mom worked at, and they're very, very hard workers. But I'm the oldest of three siblings, so I really wanted to, make my parents proud. So I commit. And back then there was no internet or anything. I was just living in the library after school, just working on this book report on Einstein. And I remember the day it was due. My dad surprised me, had it like professionally bound, and I was so proud of this work out of anything I've ever done. Um, as a 13, 14-year-old, and I couldn't wait to hand it in class. But I remember that day in class, the teacher's like, towards the end, said, I have a surprise for everybody. Jim, come to the front of the class and present your book report. And I freaked out
Mm.
because my superpower growing up as a kid was being invisible because I never knew the answer, right? I never want to be called on. I would
Yeah.
shrink, didn't want to take up space, so I wouldn't draw attention and or be bullied. And so I was so nervous I couldn't breathe. I talked to the teacher and I replied saying I didn't do it. I lied even though I worked so hard on it. And I can see the disappointment in her face, but I also remember when the class let out and I was the only one in the class leaving, I, I reached into my book bag, my backpack, and I pulled out this leather-bound, book report and I threw it in the trash. And I don't know if it's a metaphor for feeling like I was just throwing away my potential or any kind of hope, but that's how bad it was. And so I
Yeah.
struggled into the age of 18 and eventually found a mentor, and that kind of gave me some direction and asked me different questions, gave me new perspective, and I've been on this journey for 3.5 decades
Yeah.
because I feel more obligation. Shame on any of us that have struggled and have learned ways to compensate or to make things better and to share that with people who are also going through similar challenges.
And the things people say can do so much harm, even well intentioned. We've just got to be really aware of what we're saying to people. And, you talked about when you're 18. I'll come back to that in a minute because a friend of your father asked a couple
Yeah,
of key questions, this mentor, but actually, some of your early mentors were the X-Men and, comics, the importance of all literature is literature, right?
yeah,
And you've spoken before about how we have mutual friends who just love the superheroes, and you
yeah,
think about the superhero story and what it's really actually about, like if you get below the surface of it and things. But obviously, you just had to find some kind of vehicle that allowed you to find your way through the struggles that you were having, and I guess the X-Men was a part of that. That was actually a great close the loop. We'll come back to 18, but just close the loop
sure, sure.
so people
Um,
know the full arc of that X-Men story.
yeah, how it happened was I do a lot of corporate training.
Mm.
I started working with kids, at age 18, tutoring, because I wanted to share what was working for me, and I was very passionate about it. Um, One of my very first students that I was tutoring, she was a college freshman. She read 30 books in 30 days. And I wanted to find out not how. I know how. I taught her how to do it.
Mm.
Not skim or scan, but she was really reading those books. And I want to know why. I'm very curious. A lot
Mm.
of people know what to do, but they're not always doing that thing, right? And I think knowledge by itself is not power. Knowledge applied, kind of creates those kind of results. And I think the life we live are lessons we teach. But I was very curious what made her want to follow through, and found out her mother was dying of terminal cancer, and the books she was reading were books to save her mom's life. Doctors only gave her mom like 2 months to live, and
Mm.
you know, 6 months later, I get a call from this young lady. She's crying, crying profusely. And when she stops, I find out they're tears of joy that her mother not only survived, but is really getting better. The doctors don't know how or why. The doctors are calling it a miracle, but her mother attributed 100% to the great advice she got from her daughter, who learned it from all these books. And in
Mm.
that moment, I realized that two things, that if knowledge is power, then learning is our superpower. And I just thought it was
Yeah.
interesting that school teaches us what to learn, like math and history and science, but there's no class on how to learn, how to focus, how to solve problems, how to think critically, how to read better, how to improve your memory, those kind of things. So I really focus on that. But I also found the second thing I discovered was my dharma, my mission, which was
Yeah.
helping people with their learning, because I think it's one of the most important skills, especially in the world of AI. Um, is human intelligence, growing our human intelligence, be able to keep up with, what's the world is presenting. Um, but eventually, these kids, I started lecturing at universities, and they had parents started seeing their kids' results, and then and they work at law firms and insurance companies. So I started working there, and in 2013, I get a call from the chairman of 20th Century Fox and a big film studio, and I did a brain training for them on a Friday, and it was like my best ever, Simon. And I don't know what it was. Maybe walking to the boardroom, seeing all the movie posters of Avatar and Star Wars. I mean, it just put me as like felt like a child, right? And
Yeah.
I was just very playful. And but afterwards, the chairman says, "This is the best training we've done here," and he gives me a tour of the studio, and as a thank you. And I've never been on a kind of a studio lot, but there's a big movie poster the size of like a building of Wolverine, the next Wolverine movie coming out. And I set out just it's funny how like little comments lead to something else, right? New
Yeah.
idea, new individual. And I just said, I can't wait for that movie to come out. And because it was coming out for a few months, and he picks up his phone, and 5 minutes later, I'm in his private theater with 3D glasses watching Hugh Jackman fight all these super ninjas, right? And best Friday afternoon ever. But afterwards, he says, Jim, how's the movie? And I was like, you don't know this, but I couldn't read as a kid. I taught myself how to read by reading comic books, something about the hero's journey, the illustrations, the art brought the words to life. And also it allowed me to escape, right? Because
Yeah.
I was in a little bit of pain and challenge. And I told him when I was 9 years old, true story, I found out that the X-Men, which Wolverine is a member of, they have a school for the X-Men, these mutants, uh, that was in Westchester, New York, which is a suburb north of New York City, and that's
Mm.
where I lived. And I told them when I was 9, every weekend I would ride my bicycle around the neighborhood trying to find that school. And it sounds silly now talking about it in my 50s, but it was so real, like Santa Claus. I was like, I wanted to find my school. I wanted because like the X-Men aren't necessarily the strongest, but if people know who the X-Men are, they're different, right? They're
Yes.
mutants. They didn't
Yeah.
fit in. They're marginalized, and I felt like that I identified with that, right? And uh, and so I was looking for my super friends. I wanted to find my powers, right? And he's like, Jim, I didn't know you liked the X-Men. We have another 30 days of filming a new X-Men movie in Montreal. Do you want to go and visit the set? And I was like, oh yes, please. I was like, but I was like, fair energy exchange. Like, what can I do for you? He was like, oh, while you're with the cast and crew, help them like you help us, speed read scripts, memorize their lines, be focused on camera. And I was like, I could totally do that. So the next morning, Simon, I get to the plane, and I'm the last one on, but I get on, and the entire cast of X-Men is on that plane waiting for me. And I don't even see Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart. I see like Wolverine and Professor X, and I'm sitting between Holly Berry and Jennifer Lawrence flying to Montreal, and I got to share, I got to do some training and coaching with the cast and crew. And when we land, the very first scene, Simon, that they shot took place in the X-Men school. And, as a I was just like a 9-year-old boy. I just got to see my heroes come to life in the school that I've always wanted to visit. And, I spent a week there with them. When I go home to New York, there's a package waiting for me. and it's about the size of a television. I rip it open, and there's this photograph, and I'll share this on video. If people are watching this on video, it's me and the entire cast of X-Men. People thinking like that, who photoshopped that Asian, you know, guy, and with Hugh Jackman and Jennifer Lawrence and Patrick Stewart and Holly Berry. But even better than that was the note in there. It said, "Jim, thank you so much for sharing your superpowers with all of us. I know since you're a child, you've been searching for your superhero school. Here's your class photo."
That's
And
cool.
I get goosebumps. I call them truth bumps, even just thinking
Yeah,
back to that. But that was my entry point to working with a lot of actors and and others in the entertainment space. But even more meaningful for me was it's funny when you imagine something as a kid, and then you fast forward, because the whole movie, it was X-Men Days of Future Past, was a time travel movie. It took place in the future where things are very apocalyptic and very dark, and Professor X sends Wolverine, because of his healing power, back in time to deliver a message to the younger Professor X, to be able to give him advice so that he could change the course of the world's history. And I also feel like we could do that also. Like, I'm
yeah.
always constantly thinking about what would my future self want me to do today. So, something silly like that. Or what advice would I give to my younger self, as we've heard that question, a lot. But
That, that,
I,
that there's actually a lot to unpack in what you just said. I mean, apart from the fact that the theme of X-Men is that a person's differences are actually their superpower, which is a super important message for children, particularly to hear, right? So there's actually no misfit. There's just, you're fit, basically.
yeah, I like that.
And I didn't know that the school was in Westchester, New York in the movies, but it makes so much sense now. I've been to Westchester and it makes so much sense. It's such a gorgeous little place. You made an interesting comment about, knowledge is not power, applied knowledge is power. Part of the framework of chaos theory, the self-organizing system, is, a compelling purpose. In nature,
Mm,
for example, that is to survive. If in the wilds of Africa or something like that. And then it's not knowledge, it's applied knowledge, your ability to actually know what allows you to survive, to serve that purpose. And then the third component of the self organizing system is actually execution and adaptation. So learning, right? So
mm,
animals only get to apply knowledge for survival if they constantly learn and evolve in the environment that they're in. So if there's a major weather incident, the ones that don't evolve, execute, and learn don't survive, right? And it is the self-organizing system. It's the framework that effectively it's what sits under Jim Collins' hedgehog concept when you actually really study it and think about it. The other thing that strikes me in that story is just the generosity of these people that are doing something pretty difficult, making a movie, and
mm,
this guy shows up, and they go, "Well, why don't you come to the set and everything else?" I mean,
yeah,
being generous and goodwilled in the world, is something we should never forget the power of. So, you come from school, at 18, you had this experience. What were the key questions your mentor asked you at the time that really, I guess, that was an epiphany moment for you, or a
yeah.
period, or what were the key questions that propelled you into this life that you
Yeah.
live and the mission that you have now?
So I struggled from age 5 to 18. When I was 18, I was, fortunate enough to be able to get into a local university. And I thought freshman meant you can make a fresh start, right? So I took all these classes, and I wanted to show the world and show myself that I could do it. And I took all these classes, and I did worse, Simon. And it was just so much more difficult, so much more dependent on a student's ability to focus and study on their own, as opposed to spending time in class. And I was ready to quit, because I didn't have, I mentioned I'm the oldest of three, and I didn't have the money to be there. And I honestly rather my younger siblings, have that opportunity. But I had so much pressure, just because I didn't know how to tell my parents I was going to quit school and how they would
Mm,
feel about it. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm going to visit, he's going to visit his family that weekend." He's like, "Before you make this big life decision, why don't you get some perspective?" And I always think about that often, that when you change your perspective, maybe the place that you're in, the physical environment, or the people you're spending time with, gives you a new point of view. And so I agree, and the family is pretty well off, beautiful home on the water. And the father's walking me around his property before dinner and asked me a very innocent question, but probably at the time was the worst question you could ask me. He says, "Jim, how's school?" And and I'm emotionally pretty reserved and very introverted, but I start crying and bawling right in front of this complete stranger because I just couldn't handle. I had so much built up angst, and I tell my whole story about my brain injury and I'm ready to quit school. I don't know how to tell my parents. I don't want them to be ashamed or embarrassed and, disappoint them. And he's like, "Well, Jim," he asked me a different question, right? Which is
mm.
interesting when a new question, you know, kind of hijacks your focus and kind of spotlight. He's like, "Jim, why are you in school? What do you want to, And honestly, I didn't have an answer. Nobody's ever asked me that. I just thought you just do that and then you get a job, you go on a certain career. Um, well, I didn't know. And he's like, "Well, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? What do you want to have? What do you want to share, contribute?" And I never had an answer. I didn't have an answer at the immediately because nobody's ever asked me that question. And I really do think, in a way, questions are the answer. Especially in a world of AI, those prompts asking the right kind of question is 90% of it. And I start to answer him, and he pauses. He reaches into his back pocket and he pulls out like a journal, and he takes out tears a couple of sheets and gives me a pen, and he makes me write it down, like a bucket list, what I want to be, do, have,
Mm.
share in my life. And it was quite an exercise because the answers didn't immediately come right away. But after I'm done, I was like, nobody's going to see this. So I just put what I would put. And then I start folding the sheets to put in my pocket, thinking this exercise is over. And he reaches out and grabs them out of my hand. And I'm freaking out because he starts reading them. And again, like I'm this 18-year-old kid, I'm very insecure. This person's obviously, successful. And, we have this fear where we limit ourselves because we don't want to be judged, other people's expectations, their opinions
Yeah,
of us. I'm afraid of what he's going to think. He reads them, and then when he looks up, he said, "Jim, you are this close to everything on this list." And he spreads his index fingers about a foot apart. And I'm like, "No way! Give me 10 lifetimes. I'm not going to crack this list." And smart man, this changed my life. He takes his index fingers and he moves them to the side of my head, meaning what's in between is like the key, right?
mm.
My brain. And he takes me into a room of his home that I've never seen before, Simon. You would love it. It is wall to wall, ceiling to floor, covered in books. And I've never been
Right.
in I've never seen a library in somebody's home before.
Yeah,
And remember, I've never read a book, in my life, being not a great reader. It's like being in a room full of snakes. But what makes it worse is he starts going to the shelves and pulling snakes off the shelves and handing them to me. And I started looking at these titles, and there are these biographies of some pretty incredible women and men in history, and some very early personal growth books, like the classics, like Norman
yeah,
Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, Napoleon Hill, and all of these, Dale Carnegie, and he says, "Jim, I want you to read one book a week." And you have to read to succeed. And I'm like, and I say, and I go to at events all the time. People come to me in the lobby before I go on stage or after, and they're like, "Jim, so glad you're here. I just have a horrible memory. I'm just too old. I'm not that smart." And I always say the same thing. I always say, "Stop. If you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them." Right?
mm.
They're yours. I'm fighting for my limitations. I'm telling about how I have a broken brain. I have all this schoolwork. When I said schoolwork, he's like, "Jim, don't let school get in the way of your education." And I was like, wow, this was 35 years ago. I was like, that's very insightful. I didn't realize it was a Mark Twain quote at the time. But I was like, that's very insightful, but I can't promise to read these books because if my parents taught me anything, it's, to stay good to my word. And very smart man. He pulls out my bucket list, my dream list, and he starts, Simon, to read every single thing out loud. And something about hearing your dreams, your goals that you haven't shared with anybody in somebody else's voice kind of incant it out into the universe, into the
Yeah,
ether, and mess with my mind and my spirit something fierce. And to be frank, a lot of things on that list were things I wanted to do for my parents, things
Yeah.
that they couldn't afford, or even if they had the money, they wouldn't do for themselves. So, and with that purpose, I think with reasons you get better results, right? And that things have to go from your head to your heart to your hands, that you could affirm things or set KPIs or goals in your head, but if you're not
Yeah.
acting with your hands, I always, think it's important to check in with the second H, which is heart, which symbolizes emotion. And I had that emotion, so I agreed to read one book a week. So fast forward, as I wrapped up the story, I'm back at school. I'm sitting at my desk, and I have a pile of books I have to read for midterms, and a pile of books I promised to read. And I already couldn't get through pile A, so because I don't have time. So what do? I don't eat, I don't sleep, I don't exercise, I don't social, I don't do anything. I just live in the library for weeks and weeks. And one night at 2 a.m., I pass out in the library. I fall down a flight of stairs out of sheer exhaustion. I hit my head again, and I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. And at this point, when I woke up, I'm hooked up to all these IVs because I was malnourished, I was dehydrated. I was down to 117 pounds, so I lost like 50
Mm.
pounds. I thought I was dying. I mean, it was the darkest time in my life, and I asked this new question. I was like, there has to be a better way, right? And when I had that thought, the nurse came in with a mug of tea. I'm a tea drinker, and it had a picture of our friend Albert Einstein, the one I did the book report on. And it was interesting because I found out that Einstein back then, like when I was studying and doing that book report, that he had learning challenges and so on. And we don't hear a lot about that, And I realized that it's not how smart you are, it's more how are you smart, and we could talk about like intelligence and genius and the context of it. But there was a quote on that tea on that mug. It said, "The same level of thinking that has created your problem won't solve your problem,"
Mm.
and it made me ask a brand new question. It said, well, what's my real problem? Is I have a broken brain and I'm a very slow learner. And I was like, how do I think differently about it? Well, maybe I could fix my brain. Maybe I can learn how to learn better, right? And and it put me on that path of focusing on those things. And about 60 days into studying like meta learning, the art and science of learning how to learn and understanding, how to have a healthier brain and get over my TBI, a light switch flipped on, and I started to understand things for the very first time. And
Mm.
my grades skyrocketed, but so did my life, my confidence, how I showed up,
Yeah.
and then I couldn't help but help other people, and then started with this young lady and the 30 books in 30 days, and I've done it every day since.
And it's interesting. I mean, you said earlier in the episode, people aren't really born with genius, you build it. And that is true. Even the brightest person is not going to show up that way if they don't do anything with that natural ability, right? And you do build it over a lifetime. You build it on the back of what you absorb and who you spend time with and then how you apply. The interesting thing about genius, which is a field that I spend a lot of my time in at a company level, what is the genius of a company? And it usually
Mm,
starts with the founder, right? Um, but founders who start great companies or bring great genius to the market don't just bring it on the back of, hey, I've got this great idea. You should all buy it and it's going to be great. Their their genius is built on iteration. Like I've got this great idea, now I'm going to test it. And which is again the self-organizing system of chaos theory. Like what's the purpose or passion? I no brain left behind. Great. What's the applied knowledge? Well, I'm learning things about how the brain works, and I iterate or you iterate and test that worked, test that didn't, make the adjustments. So the adaptation in nature, and then the interesting thing about genius is it only becomes genius when the world sees it. Other than that, it's just a good idea in your head, right? So great art or great music only becomes genius when people see it or hear it. So the execution piece, right? Putting it out
mm,
into the world. And so, for young business leaders who think they've got a great idea, that's fabulous. But you actually need to build that idea. You need to build that genius. You build the muscle through iteration, but it becomes genius when it does the equivalent of helping a young woman read 30 books in 30 days that actually saves her mother's life. that's when it
Mm,
became genius. That's when what you were sharing with her became genius. That leads us naturally into Limitless. I really want people to start to get this now. And so
mhm.
I already have three circles, that are
I love it.
that are ready, and I'll just give them some color so that, and I'd love to build this
Hmm.
um, in a specific order for people. I'd love people to understand it from the inside out. Define the word limitless. Define limitless for me first,
Sure.
and then we'll walk out to the petals around it. What are the three things that sort of drive that limitlessness? So to
I
unpack
love
limitless
this.
for us as a concept.
This is such a different conversation than I'm used to. I love the visual representation, and I love the clarity that you have, because that is I I love it because it's so elegant the way that you do it. So, I've having spent time with you, even most recently, when we went, there's this round table, and there was somebody asking questions, and I just could just kind of peek at your visual notes, and it's this, and I could really relate to it, and
Mm,
so I appreciate that superpower that you've developed. So Limitless for me is not about being perfect. It's about
right.
advancing and progressing beyond what you're demonstrating or what you believe is possible. The how it came about was people thought, I didn't, I wrote this book. It came out in 2020, in April of 2020, which is an interesting time to launch your first
Yeah.
work. But that aside, people thought I had like dozens of books, but I just didn't. I was in a again, I want to help people, but I don't necessarily want to be known for it. It's this weird thing, where I just, I value just us kind of not, I don't just, I don't like the spotlight still, but I also feel like a more obligation to do what I do. So the book, when it came out, what had come before that, just not no one, people don't know this, but I was in a car accident in 2018, and just there's a tractor trailer, and it's like just the whole thing on the highway, and I could have died, or maybe should have, and made me think about legacy. And it's kind of a word that used a lot, but it
Yeah.
just I signed a book deal that's been in my inbox for like 10 years, because I feel like I didn't do, what I could have in taking this work out. But I wrote the book, like I do anything, as something I wish I had when I was going through these struggles.
Yeah.
Because so it was fine-tuned over time, from my personal experience, and then getting feedback from students in every country in the world, with our online academy. And I'm in front of a good 200,000 people a year, and so we get a lot of feedback live. Um, so I thought about it as, because the opposite of limitless is being limited, and I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of people feel stuck. And so I wanted to create a model that was functional and elegant, and mostly complete, where, like, I think if people feel stuck, they're in a box. And
Yeah.
even if you think about a cube, that if you draw a cube, like you think of or imagine it, like it's three-dimensional. So the three forces that contain you keep you stuck. And these are the same three forces I feel like will make you limitless, that will liberate you out of that box, or at least
Mm,
expand the dimensions of that box. And I call them three M's, which we're representing right here with a Venn
mm,
diagram, three intersecting circles. And those three M's, the last one is methods, right? The blue could be, for example, methods. And everyone wants to know the methodology to financial success, or losing that weight, or hitting that goal, or starting that company, or getting investors, or reading faster, right?
mm.
But as we've talked about, when I was first put together Limitless, the book was actually 100% methodology: how to read faster, how to remember names and faces, how to learn
Right.
languages, how to get speeches without notes, how to focus at will. But before I hit send to my publisher, I asked myself a question. I paused because I felt intuitively like there was something missing. I was like, well, 100% of the people who get this book and read it get the results they're hoping for. And my honest answer was no, because a lot of people know what to do, but they don't do it because common sense is not often common practice. So I added the two other M's, before that. So the section is broken down into those three M's. And the first one is your mindset. For me, are the set of assumptions and attitudes you have about something.
Is
Because
that the
somebody can
green or the
learn,
red?
you can make it the red.
Yeah,
Um, in the Venn diagram, sometimes I make it like Mickey Mouse ears, two
yeah,
circles on
yeah,
top and one in his face, but it doesn't really matter the order. But mindset, set of assumptions and attitudes you have about something. So if the method was on how to start a business or how to build wealth and make money online or whatever, but if their mindset is money, their attitudes and assumptions are money is the root of all evil, you have to hurt people to make money, money doesn't grow on trees, then they're still going to be contained in that box,
yeah,
right? Because they're only, I believe that all behavior is belief driven, right? If you think you can or think you can, either way, you're right. I think there's some truth to that Henry Ford talked about. Um, and it would keep you stuck. Like if you feel like, and three things I would point out in mindset is not just how you approach love, because if your association to love is, something that might be disempowering, you're not going to do the methods for doing that. A lot of my work is taking nouns and turning them to verbs. You don't have love, you do it. You don't have energy, you generate it. You don't have focus, there's a process for focusing. And the reason I like to take those nouns and turn them to verbs, because you wake up and you're like, oh, I hope I have some creativity and some focus so I could write this book. No, because then hope is an awful strategy. I would say, like, if you turn it into a verb, then you have a process and it gives you your agency back. So I always start with mindset. I think three things besides applying it towards other things like your mindset towards love or health or or to money is you're to yourself. Like I think
yeah,
three core things are things like what I believe is possible,
yeah,
what I believe I'm capable of. You might think that it's possible for Simon to do this, but do you believe you're capable of it? And the third thing that very rarely gets brought up in coaching is do I believe I deserve it? Right?
yeah.
Because there's that
Interesting.
thermostat.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah,
deserve to make that income or to lose that weight or to have that happy relationship or whatever? So mindset is very core and key,
yeah,
and then foundational.
yeah.
But
It's
here's the thing, like somebody could have a limitless mindset and limitless methods, but you need also the final M, which is motivation. Because some people, let's say you have a limitless mindset, you believe it's possible, you believe you're capable, you believe you deserve it, and you have the great methods for doing that thing, whatever that to reach your goal. But if you're not motivated to get out of that box, then you're still stuck,
yeah,
right? And so I focus on those three levers because I think you could control the controllables.
yeah,
And I feel like we have influence on our thoughts, our beliefs, our motivation, and our methods. And, I break down motivation also into three parts in terms of how to motivate yourself. That motivation is not something you have, it's something that you do and you can create um, based on what keeps us procrastinating. Like I feel like if we self-sabotage, it's usually a mindset issue.
yeah,
You take a step forward, two steps back. But also, if we procrastinate, it's definitely more of a motivation issue, where people are trying to use willpower, which is
yeah.
not lasting and sustainable.
I've got the things that are popping in my head at the moment is, I've watched you on stage. So I'm going to remember 100 names from the audience. Like the method is impressive,
Mhm.
and methods often are, right? But the most
Yeah.
impressive methods without motivation, which is the inspiration,
Yes.
are
So it's
meaningful.
actually, I build that in because the white space that you have where I believe where mindset crosses over with motivation,
Yeah.
you have inspiration.
Oh,
So
perfect.
that shared space is so there's three M's and three I's. So
Yep.
where mindset and motivation cross over in that shared space, you have the first I, which is inspiration. And what does
Yep.
an inspiring movie or inspiring speaker do? They affect your mindset in terms of what's possible, and
Yep.
they also give you some motivation, some
Yeah.
umph, right, to do that. But then what is it lacking? You're inspired, but you don't have the method, right?
Yeah.
And then also where something like where mindset crosses over with method, then that white space you have another I, which is ideation, right? Because it's your mindset. You believe, it's possible here, it's an idea, and you know the method, It's still an idea, and that's ideation.
Mm.
Um, and then finally, somebody could also have motivation and methods, and when that crosses over as another, like a third eye, which is implementation. Somebody's motivated and they have the method, so they're implementing, but they're only going to be able to implement to the degree that they're not accessing that mindset, right? And then where all three M's or three I's converge in the middle, limitless could be a fourth I, which is integration, right?
Yeah.
And another form, I feel like it's almost your identity, where you have this alignment there, where it's frictionless because you're not fighting yourself, right? You believe it's possible, you're doing the work, you know the work to do.
Yeah.
So, I really feel like, mindset could be something like the what, the motivation could be maybe more the why, and the method could be the how you're going to do it. But when it's integrated, I feel like you become more limitless. And I feel like this works on a micro level. So if
Yeah.
anyone feels stuck in that box in any area, like when I'm coaching somebody, I'm trying to decode and deconstruct where the bottleneck is, if it's one or a combination of these three. Do they not, it is a mindset issue. Do they not believe it's possible, they're capable of, or even deserve it? Or is it a motivational issue? Or do they not feel the purpose behind it? Do they lack the energy to be able
Yeah.
to achieve it? Because an exhausted mind won't do anything. Or have they not broken it down into small, simple steps? Because one of the things that keep us from doing something is it's intimidating, like to reach that goal, to even work out if it's not part of your habit. How do you break it down into, because I think little by little a little becomes a lot, and consistency could compound, but what could stall
Yeah.
somebody is the overwhelm or the intimidation, and a confused mind won't do
Yeah.
anything.
It's I live in the world of visual models and frameworks, right? And the reason we use models is because it gives people visual access to a complex concept.
Yeah.
Uh, but different to imagery, it also gives people structural access to the complex concept. So this framework is a structure, and it lets people make sense of. When you give people visual access, it allows them to say, "Oh, I see," and that's the "I see" is the sign of, "Oh, that's starting to make sense." And then when you give people structural access, they kind of go, "I get it now," and
Mm,
so now I've internalized the sense making. So I see and I get it, and at that point, this becomes a viable concept for people. But if you're up for it, I'd love to push it a little bit, push the model a
yeah.
little bit, because you said something really interesting. If we think about mindset and we think about life's opportunities, right? Um, there's almost, full to shallow.
Yeah.
And if we think about under mindset, the deserved line, and you get to access everything that is below the deserved line. So whatever you believe you deserve, that's what you get to access. So wherever your deserved line is, you get to access everything below it, right? And you know, a part of mindset is how high do you set your line?
Mm,
So the lower your line, the less you get out of life. The higher you set the deserved line, the more you get out of life. And you sort of said one of the key things about mindset is what people perceive that they deserve. And I think we'll get the logic of that. If we were going to identify same thing, oops, same thing, life's opportunities from full to shallow, what would the line be? What would we call the line on motivation? If the mindset line is your sense of what you deserve, what would we label the line under motivation that determines how much of life's opportunities you get if you had to put a name on it? And I know this is without notice, basically.
No, no,
So
no, no, no. Of course, no. This is why I live for this. The refinement and making it elegant. So I could appreciate new questions. And
mm,
I love. I'm a very visual thinker, so I love the representation. One of the things it could be in terms of motivation, if people are rating themselves, right? So my formula for motivation is P times E times S3, purpose times energy times small simple steps. That the things that keep us from being motivated, we either don't
sorry,
know
P
the
times
reason
E.
times S3. and then I'll answer your question in terms of that
Yeah.
line. P times E times S3. So whenever I feel stalled or stuck in terms of not the mindset or the methods, where I'm putting things off or I'm not doing the thing I need to do, I want to feel the purpose. And the key word there is that I would underscore is feel. Because a lot of people intellectually know the purpose of
Yeah.
doing of working out. They know the
Yeah.
purpose of reading each day. They know the purpose of making those sales calls. But if they don't feel it, like for example, years ago, I saw somebody in my neighborhood, and I'm in a position where I have to remember everybody because that's the expectation people have. But I didn't know who this gentleman was, but he looked extremely familiar. And when he opened up his mouth to greet me, recognized the voice. I knew exactly who it was. And I was like, and the backstory is this person looked amazing, but as long as I've known him, he's been extremely unhealthy, and he took pride in being unhealthy, right? But now he looked younger, and he had this glow and this life about him, and always curious. I'm like, what are you doing? You look amazing. He's like, yeah, I feel amazing. And he tells me all the things he's doing. And I'm like, well, me and our mutual friends have been telling you to do that for years. He's like, yeah. He's like, and he tells me a story of he was away on a business trip internationally, came back, and he found his daughter crying, 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 and she woke up from a nightmare that he had passed away, right? But that touched him so much that purpose, with reasons, I feel like you get the results. With that emotion, it made him make a decision. Like there's a quote in Limitless from a French philosopher. It says life is the letter C between the letters B and D. And so
Mm.
I refer to it often where B stands for birth and D stands for death, and life, what's in between, choice, right?
Mm.
Your life is the output of all the choices you made up to this point, right?
Sure.
And for all of us, who are we going to spend time with? Where are we going to live? What are we going to do? What are we going to focus on? What are we going to eat? What are we going to feed our minds? Everything, right? And I think that these difficult times, they could diminish us, or these difficult times could distract us, or these difficult times they could develop us, right? We ultimately decide with these choices. So, I feel like he made the choice, but it required feeling purpose, not cognitively understanding purpose and the reasons to do something that's beneficial for him and his family, and society, I would say. But he felt it, and that made a difference. So P is purpose, E is energy, meaning I talked about 10 things to have cognitive endurance, cognitive vitality, everything from how to optimize your sleep, the best brain diet, how to manage your stress, which could be depleting energy, the inner environment, which could
Yeah.
be siphoning off energy, and so on. And then if you have that dialed in again, so I feel like we're not motivated either because we lack relevancy or reason, purpose.
Yeah.
We lack energy, or the thing's too big, so we have to break it down into S3, which is a small, simple step. I would
Mm.
say the line, if I was to choose one of those three, I would start with the emotion. I don't know how to necessarily, it's a little bit abstract when we're talking about emotions, similar
Well,
to abstract
I,
in terms of
I
what you deserve,
we've got three M's and three I's, so now I'm going to go for three D's,
desire.
and it's called that desire. So underneath that, what is desire? It's what's your purpose, and
Yeah,
what's the feeling of purpose rather than the cognition of purpose, right? And the deep
very
feeling
much.
of purpose actually is desire. And, one of the two great human emotions, right? Fear and desire. And, therefore, what's your energy about it? And once again, if you do pragmatic, practical things to fuel your desire and push the line up, you get more of life. Now, Jim, we've got a challenge because we have to, we're going to have to come up with a D word over here
Yeah.
for method. So, life's opportunities.
Yeah, so
Uh,
somebody could have limitless mindset that all is possible and limitless motivation. But if they're using old methods of marketing or old methods for sales or old methods of weight loss or old
yeah,
methods for fill in the reading, right? Like we
yeah,
teach people. So the idea here is we want to upgrade these things. So, it would be like, again, people could believe it's possible and be motivated, but they're using an old strategy
yeah,
that's not current, and then they could be left behind and still stuck in that box. For me, if we use a D, it would be something attuned to development, meaning that we're upgrading those skills and those strategies, those processes. Um, But yeah, we don't want to, because the idea here is so many people out of fear are downgrading their dreams to meet the current situation. For me, I want to flip it. Like, what if instead we downgraded our dreams, but instead we upgraded our mindset, our
So,
motivation, our
so
methods
can
that
I
we're using?
can
Yeah.
I offer a word
Yeah.
that it's the design. You
I
know,
like design.
design, put the design line where you want it to be for how much of life you want to access. So
Mm,
design the method to get how much of what you want to access. Put your desire line where it needs to be for you to get how much of what you want to access. Put the deserve line where it needs to be so you don't actually cut out. I think the difference though is the deserve line cuts out what's above it. The other two give you access to everything below it. So you shift the other two up to be able to access everything below it, and you shift the deserve line up to release everything above it, which is an interesting kind of iteration of these elements of mindset, motivation, and method. Does that make some sense?
it does. I mean, I think if it's a line of deserving, then it might actually, I could see it from that point of view. I could also see that if you raise the deserve line, you'll get, maybe it's not above or below. Maybe
Yeah,
it's at that line. I mean, certainly it's like a
yeah, we're making.
thermostat, right? Like you're
Well,
setting a thermostat
that's right.
setting in terms of a standard or
Yeah,
of what you're willing to accept in a relationship, in business, in your bank
yeah,
account.
and we're making up this part of the conversation as we go. We're having a dialogue about it,
I love that.
but
I love this.
but it's worth some research actually. So, let's can we talk a bit about the world of AI today, and the expanded editions of Limitless now are starting to obviously written in AI powered world, a very different modern technology world than when you first wrote Limitless.
Yeah,
Um, I'd love to kind of unpack what you're observing through that lens, and
yeah,
really what you've actually brought to the work since that's
yeah.
caused the edition.
So the expanded edition, when we updated the book, and it's almost like, I'm, should I update this book or write a whole new book? I don't
Mm,
know if you've ever get thoughts about that, updating your past work, but I added a new section called momentum. And I realized that if you go back to the Venn diagram, that if you release and unlimit, I created this term called unlimiting, which I feel like it's becomes a verb where it's a process of unlimiting your
mm,
mindset, your motivation, your methods. So there's less friction. And then I feel like momentum is around it because if you take it's always like for me, I'm always thinking about what can I take away, right? If I take away the barriers in mindset, the barriers of what keeps us stuck in terms of our motivation, take away like fatigue,
mm,
as an example, or lack of clarity, take that away, or the barriers of old learning, when it talks about design for the methods, then you have momentum, right? Like a wheel that goes around it. And I talked about different, and one of them was AI, and my question was, okay, how can you use AI to enhance your HI using these principles, where Limitless really is your brain is this incredible supercomputer, but it doesn't come with an owner's manual. So Limitless was written to be an owner's manual for the
yeah,
brain, but also the application was learning how to learn. The through line I feel like that leaders have, as amongst many, in terms of pattern recognition, would be they're avid learners, right? And it's not only your ability to learn rapidly, but also unlearn and also relearn, right? You talked about adaptation. I think we're in the age of
yeah,
adaptation, right? And you're right. Like creatures have a superpower. Some creatures in nature, they could fly. Some could breathe underwater. Some are super fast. We're not any of those things naturally as humans, but because of our minds, we we can fly. We can, with our minds, go underwater. We can, be super fast using technology. And for me, technology is an incredible tool. So the way I look at AI is we took the principles of accelerated learning, memory palaces and tools, and space repetition, interval review, and used AI to be able to enhance our learning. For
mm,
me, my position on AI is it's not so much artificial intelligence; it's more augmented intelligence. Like it's a tool for us to use as a partner to enhance our creativity, our focus, our output, to automate things that we don't want to do. Like, but it's also, I'm very optimistic about technology. Like fire is an early form of technology, probably the earliest. It could be used to cook your food, or it could burn down your home, right? It's just how it's utilized. I don't think AI will replace humans as much as humans who don't know how to learn and adapt faster, then AI is evolving will outperform everyone who doesn't use it. So AI is a multiplier. AI could scale things, but what are we scaling? We're scaling human intelligence, right? What we're bringing to it. If someone's thinking is weak, AI scales weakness. If your thinking is strong, I think AI scales more of that genius. And so
Yeah.
I feel like the future belongs, my statement, we had this conversation with Sally, I've always used that kind of fascinate in early in my career, even if I didn't know about it. I always say things like, there's no such thing as a good or bad memory. And people are like, oh, sure there is. No, but I say, no, there's a trained memory and an untrained memory. Or I'll say, it's not how smart you are. And people are like, yeah, kind of it is. No, it's how are you smart, right? So I've always used that. And what I've used most recently is my mission while we teach and have courses, like even going back to the Venn diagram, we have courses on all those three things, since 2008, on mindset, on changing beliefs, on motivation for energy and brain optimization, and getting clarity around purpose, and obviously methods. We have the most. We have courses on focus, on study, on memory improvements, speed reading, flow, productivity, as the output for that. So I could appreciate the models that you built for these businesses, because it's core and it's key, right? And it's a great way to sell the programs that you're fulfilling on also. But my statement on media most recent is HI is greater than AI.
Yeah.
Human intelligence is greater than artificial intelligence. People always pull back and say there's no way, but high performers, they don't, they like AI could do massive computation and put out output, but ultimately human beings are the ones that have to decide next action steps, right? The direction of things, the meaning of things, everything that makes us more human. So I focus
Well,
on 12 areas of human intelligence, and I think the output of that is people show wisdom and stronger intuition and more confidence when they train, metacognition and these other areas of,
AI, once again, if you think about it, a line rising, technology, not just AI, but the industrial age, the steam engine, etc. As we introduce technology, the line rises and takes up all the work of humans underneath it, right? And
yeah,
so, what is above and below the line? Again, to use the line as an analogy, and concepts, conceptualization, construct, computation, those sorts of things have fallen below the line. Even communication these days, but what is still above the line, AI is getting there, but certainly context is still above the line. But what is definitely above the line is conscience,
yeah,
compassion, care, and we're a while away. And artificial intelligence is not a great name because it's built on everything the human species has learned, and there's nothing artificial about that,
yeah.
and so synthetic intelligence might have been a more apt name at the
And I
time.
think, and I look at that as exactly that. Like, artificial intelligence is accelerating exponentially, but human intelligence is not. Human intelligence is undermanaged, underprotected, undertrained. But I think that's that gap that's really scaring people, because the truth
Yeah,
is AI is exactly that. It's synthetic cognition, where
yeah,
HI is biological cognition and AI processes information, but HI is creating the meaning, behind it. And
yeah,
meaning is where this is where power lives, right?
yeah,
I think the relationship between, now HI times AI could be an incredible multiplier, but it only multiplies the operator, right? If your thinking is shallow, AI scales shallow thinking. If your thinking like yours is strategic, AI could
yeah,
scale strategy. If your identity is insecure, AI is going to amplify comparison, right?
yeah.
It's just, and if your identity is more grounded, AI could amplify your creativity, your gifts, So I don't see AI as much of a threat. I think undeveloped human intelligence is, where
I think that's right.
where if AI is exponential and it's great, and that humans' ability to keep up, and that's also going to magnify the things that we teach. Like AI is going to if anything, enhance distraction, enhance memory lapses, enhance information overload and overwhelm, right? So I feel like, learning how to learn, learning, metacognition, because I think a through line, if we were using the model, are a couple things that I would add, if I was to update it, is like self-awareness, right? As like maybe the top, environment on the bottom, like because
Mm.
environment, we do live events. You and I speak at a lot of live
Yeah,
events, but a lot of people, have they elevated things temporarily in terms of what they deserve and what they believe is possible, but then they go home and around people, places, and their expectations, leaning into them, and people do, go back to their default, right?
yeah. Well, the environment always wins,
Exactly. And
ultimately.
and so that's the challenge of a lot of times, when you go to an event and hopefully, deep immersion, you make some shifts and you hold enough personal responsibility, like, and instead of trying to maybe change your friends or your family around it, maybe I think the life we live are the lessons we teach. The best thing we could do is to be able to step up and be a living example of possibility. Um, but yeah, I
It's
think a lot of people are afraid of AI, but I think what they're really afraid of is becoming irrelevant, losing
yeah,
agency, losing income, losing who their identity is, losing even their cognitive edge, right? But
yeah.
this isn't about robots. I'm thinking about it more as value. You know,
It's
uh,
interesting that um, humans evolve, and that's incremental, and we
mhm.
evolve through the experience of being a human. And that evolution, in part, has to have the decisions that are made through conscience and ethic involved, whatever your ethic and your morality and your conscience is. AI is algorithmic, which is exponential. And so we've got this incremental evolution against an exponential development, if you like. And I think that gap is partly where people have this fear. And I think, the work you do is critical in an AI powered world because we have to learn how to be uh, faster than incremental in terms of
Yeah.
a personal evolution, right? How do we take that HI and pace it? There's just a reality about the human species that sometimes when I say it, people don't really like me talking about it. But the fact is, humans only care about the future if it includes us. Like the planet will be just fine. It's had five major extinction events over the hundreds of billions of years. And
Yeah.
so, in reality, why do humans care about the environment? Well, only if the future includes us, right? But if the environment destroys us, the planet will be fine. It will recover, but the human race won't be here anymore. And so, we talk about AI through the same lens. What does it mean for us as humans in the future? We're quite a selfish species in that we care about the future if it includes us, right? And so, maybe what artificial intelligence or synthetic intelligence is causing is we've got to pay real attention to what we're going to be as a species at brain level,
Yeah.
to keep pace with the environment that's around us because AI is an environmental thing. It's a part of the environment we live in now. So
And
how are we
and
going
in
to
this
adapt to that?
And in this technological evolution, I feel like does require a personal human evolution,
Mm,
right? To be able to catch up, to be able to keep up, to be able to get ahead, because AI does not only just replace thinking, right? I talked about it in Limitless. I call it digital, deduction, where AI and technology is telling us everything through algorithms, and
mm,
that we don't have to think. And there's been this MIT study about, students relying on ChatGPT as opposed to those using Google and those using no technology, and the cognitive engagement, and then potential long-term challenges. But I feel like AI replaces it can replace, thinking, but what's premium as humans is the things you mentioned, like judgment,
yeah,
emotional intelligence, creativity, ethical reasoning, right?
yeah,
Empathy, decision making under uncertainty, because there could be a lot also in misinformation, right? AI
yeah,
could generate options, but it cannot determine wisdom, right? And
yeah,
I feel like human beings with our wisdom, as happily your show is named after, wisdom compounds,
yeah,
right? So for me, human intelligence is not IQ, that's an antiquated test that I could teach anybody how to get genius level points on. That's fixed when you take a test when you're 8, and that's your potential when you're 88. I don't think that tests for the right things, and plus it's not fixed like your shoe size.
Yeah.
But, but HI could be things like your focus, driving attention deliberately. It could be your critical thinking, evaluating information intelligently. It could be your learning adaptation or velocity to be able to adapt faster, keep up with the change. It could be your emotional regulation, governing your own emotional state under anxiety or stressful conditions, right? It could be your creative synthesis, connecting across verticals and domains, right? I mean, AI is so broad. I mean, HI is so broad, and I just feel like it's under talking about awareness. People aren't talking about it, and it's underdeveloped. It's underprotected, um, and maybe we shouldn't automate all those things.
Yeah. It's interesting. I could talk all day with you about this, Jim, but I want to wrap up with three quick questions. But you've just given us a great summary. A part of the human condition is to keep evolving your method,
Yeah.
so that you keep improving, keep evolving the design of what you're doing about how you actually approach life. But what that requires then is that you have a reason for doing it, a desire, a motivation to want to improve that method. If you don't have a motivation for the method's probably also not going to improve, and therefore you won't get implementation against that design. But until you actually really get clear about the mindset internally, the insight about who you
Yeah.
are and where you're limiting yourself and where you're releasing yourself, you don't get the inspiration and then the ideation that actually supports it. And so limitless is an output of how you're showing up and the work you're doing around these levers. And it's fabulous work. And thank you for doing it, from actually some pretty harrowing experiences. But then again, you wouldn't be doing the work had you not lived through those life experiences, right? It wouldn't have driven you to the work. So
And
super
I could
important.
appreciate you saying that, because anybody going through struggle, like my two biggest challenges, remember, were learning and public speaking, and
Mm.
life has a sense of humor because all I do is public speak on this thing called
Yeah.
learning. But it's just a reminder to anyone that adversity can be an advantage. There's this people talk about post-traumatic stress, and it is very real. We just did a podcast on our show about post-traumatic growth, where percentage of those people who've gone through certain things, they wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but they wouldn't change what they went through, because through it they found some kind of gift, they found a mission, they found a trait, they found clarity, they found purpose, they found something that was invaluable. And so while as difficult as it was, you know those years as a child, I wouldn't change it, because I wouldn't be the person that I'm proud to be today,
Yeah.
doing the work that I'm doing today. One thing, just to, because I'm thinking about it out loud, if you drew like an x-axis and a y-axis, maybe you could, if you were to do that, I would say, if you did like a just one
Okay.
quadrant, right? Just, and then I would say, like, going left to right on the horizontal would be something like low AI use to high AI use. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's the, like, horizontal axis, and going up would be going from low to high human intelligence, if that makes sense.
Oh,
And
sorry. Yeah.
then if you were to break that into quadrants, like, if you were to just draw a grid and make 4 quadrants out of that, something, I'm just thinking out loud, just because
Yep.
now I'm very inspired talking to you about this. Like, the bottom left would be low AI and low HI.
Yep.
And so that quadrant would be irrelevance, right? Their person is disengaged, they're underskilled, there's no leverage, there's no growth, right? Because they're
Yep.
not using their AI or HI. The
Yep.
bottom right would be high AI and low HI. And that would be, I don't know what to call it, but it's almost like a fragile dependence, right? Because that's where you're not using any of your faculties. You're just completely dependent on AI, And this could be dangerous, right? High AI use, low critical thinking, low emotional regulation, low discernment. This
Yeah,
person is outsourcing their thinking and maybe they appear or feel productive, but cognitively they're shrinking, right? Your
yeah.
mind's like a muscle if you're just using technology to do the work for
We,
you.
we could call that exposure. You're
Hmm.
fully exposed in that quadrant, you
Yeah.
know?
And then the top left would be high intelligence, but not using AI, low AI, and that person's just under leveraged. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know. We can label it whatever we want to label it, but this is a strong thinker who's resisting technology. So
yeah,
they're intelligent, they're capable, but they're very inefficient, not using the resources that they have. So they'll survive, but they're not going to dominate. And then in
yeah,
the top right, high AI, high HI, that I mean that's like augmented intelligence, right? HI and AI combined. I feel like that's going to be the future, right? Where you have human judgment, you have AI to accelerate things and automate things that you don't want to do, or don't have to use a lot of decision
yeah,
fatigue, and it requires cognitive load. You
yeah.
could use
So,
strategic discernment, but that's where exponential leverage I feel like would live.
yeah,
Um,
it's an interesting mix of the two dimensions. It's augmented intelligence. It's also augmented humans.
yeah, very, very
Again,
much so.
because humans only care about the future if it has us in it, right? And so we
I
act,
like that's very true.
we want to be augmented humans into the future. We don't want to be irrelevant, bottom left. We don't
Right.
want to be exposed, bottom right, fragile dependence. We definitely don't want to be under leveraged, top right. We want to be augmented humans in a modern technology world. That's really what we want. We don't care about modern technology if it doesn't create our future that we want, basically. Now,
Yeah.
there's bad actors in the world and good actors in the world, but actually, the augmentation is about augmented humans. Jim, um, as I said, I could chat all day with you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'd love to finish off with three quick questions, if that's
Okay.
okay. Just a completely different perspective. If you could time travel, I'm going to open this up to a place or even a person. If you could time travel to any place or meet any person in history, like what fascinates
Oh
you?
goodness.
Where does your mind go to? Where would you like to go to, or who would you like to be able to speak to?
Oh goodness. I wrote the largest chapter in Limitless is the chapter on memory. Yeah, I lost my grandma to Alzheimer's when I was 7. We donated the proceeds of Limitless to Alzheimer's research for women who are twice as
Yeah,
likely to experience Alzheimer's than men. But I wrote it in I wrote it in Greece because I read that the great orators 2,500 years ago
right.
would use some of the memory palaces and things that I share in Limitless there. So I was very inspired. So maybe ancient Greece would be
Yeah,
interesting to me,
yeah,
like, fifth century BC in Athens. Not because it was perfect, but I feel like it was pivotal, civilization asking different questions, at that time. But of course, I mean, there's other times I would like to, the Medici family, the Renaissance. Selfishly, I train in martial arts a lot. I would love to have met Bruce Lee and,
yeah,
gone through classes. I mean, like, yeah, 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 yeah. I don't know how people could be bored. I love these questions just in general, but I don't know how people are bored in life because I do these thought experiments all the time inside my mind.
yeah,
Um, so, but there's a number of times in history I'd love to
yeah.
be able to experience.
I love history. I have the picture that you know you think about ancient Greece and the great philosophers, and in my mind, I imagine them all sitting around and pondering the big questions in life. In truth, they're probably also going day to day and having to figure out what they're going to eat and all that sort of thing. But that was certainly a period of philosophy. What about is there a standout moment of pure happiness for you that is just one of the pivotal moments of life that you remember?
Yeah, I don't want to be cliche, but I'm in my 50s. I started my with our kids when I was 50. So we have two very young children. So anything involving them, which is a daily, I have the blessings of working from home when I want to and able to. And so, I'd always thought, Simon, I would be like brain hacking the heck out of these kids. But I found the three biggest evolutions in my personal growth, besides reading and studying with mentors, which I really treasure, would be being an entrepreneur has
Yeah.
been a big growth, right? I've never gotten a paycheck from an employer in my life. So when things ride on you and, you shoulder responsibility, for your business to grow, I
Yeah.
had to grow. The second one is my intimate relationship. Obviously that person, my wife is a mirror to me and very vulnerable, and that's a big growth. I think a happy spouse, happy house. But also now fatherhood has been a big growth, and I'm learning more from the kids. I mean, they're amazing. And instead of me teaching as much as I do, I'm learning presence and imagination, and not fearing of making mistakes and falling down and what other people think, and their playfulness and just like this childhood like wonder and the questions that they ask. And so every moment with them is a blessing. And
Yeah.
and I've had some magical moments in my life, but that's the thing that hits me here.
Well, learning to revisit the world as an adult through the lens of a child's wonder and awe
Yeah,
is actually the first lesson. I mean, I think as parents, we all have this idea that we're going to, teach our children and show them what we've learned and everything else. But actually, I think you need to let children have those years of imagination and fearless play, because they are fearless, up until a certain age in terms of their willingness to just suspend disbelief. And,
yeah,
it's interesting to look at the world back through the lens of a child's wonder and awe over the world. And everything's possible, everything's limitless to a child,
yeah,
right? Um,
yeah, very much.
you had to read the books one a week, and you've become a receiver of wisdom and insight. What's a recent book that's been one of your favorite reads recently, of
Yeah.
recent time?
I have a book club, so where we read the book, and I would love to invite you in it.
Mm.
Wherever all our members buy the book and we read it together. I show them how to remember key parts, and we have discussions with the author at the end of the month. So I've done that for a few years,
Yeah.
and then obviously we have our podcast, which has 100 million downloads, and we interview a lot of authors. And I can't wait to have you on our show, because I know our audience are absolutely going to love this conversation because I have
Mm.
so many questions for you. The next book in our book club, and while we've had everyone, there, that many of that just a new book just came out last week called Make Sense by a buddy of mine. How to Rewire Your Mind and Transform Your Life. Talks about IRS, which is this internal response system,
Ah,
and the anecdotes in there are just really great. But I'm biased because it's a friend of mine, and we just added him into our book club. But for 4.5 years, I read a book a day.
yeah,
I didn't have growing up, any contacts or education or money to speak of, but I would pour myself in books when I learned how to read better because I felt like a lot of them became friends in my mind, and it opened up my thinkings. Somebody has decades experience like you do, and you put it into a book, and I could sit down and read that book in a day or two. I could download decades into days, and besides the fact that reading, I find, is one of the best things you can do for your brain. That reading is to your mind what exercises to the body. But I am today based on the people I spend time with and the books that I've read. And I can't go. I'd rather go a day without eating than a day without
yeah.
feeding my mind.
Well, I'm going to have to get a copy of that book. People think the key to business success is to, demonstrate is to demonstrate compelling self-evident value in your marketing and then
Mm,
in the sale in order to get the customer, right? And it's only after they're a customer they get to experience your value, right? And so,
yeah.
but actually, the reality is in today's market is it's the key is not clarity. The key is the clarity that counts. Your customer just wants to know that you have the specific clarity that counts, that
Hmm.
makes more sense than anything else they've heard. And so, what customers are buying, and we really haven't talked about business today, but what customers are buying is that which makes more sense than anything else they've heard. Now, what that actually means is you need to be able to figure out what makes sense to you, but also at the meta make sense level. If you understand how people make sense of, it's the extension of the challenger based sales work that was done. Now the trend in selling is sense making. And so it's understanding the meta level of sense making, right? I need to buy the
Yeah.
book. I have to have a read now. You've sparked my interest. Jim, this has just been a joy. This has been absolute joy.
Absolutely.
Thank you for giving us this time. We ran long, so I hope we haven't cut
Yeah.
too far into your evening at your end, but it's been fantastic. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And
Yeah. Simon,
yeah,
I just want to thank you for just having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I can't wait to have you on our podcast to share your work with our community. And my message to everyone listening is to I feel like there's a version of ourselves that's patiently waiting, and the goal is we show up every single day until we're introduced. So I appreciate your time and your talent. This has been one of the most these weren't typical questions, and I love every part of it. So thanks for doing it. And so not only just what you do, but the manner you do it.
thank you. And thank you for the episode. And I'll be there. We'll make a time. I'll come and do the
Absolutely.
reverse chat with you. I look forward to it. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, can't wait.